Okay, I'm going to call to order the special meeting of the El Dorado County Board of Supervisors for Tuesday, November 1st, 2022. Today Supervisor Novacell's online joining us. I see her there, so we're all here. And if everybody would stand and join me in the pledge. Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, well, with that, I think we just go straight to our 2 o'clock item number 1, Kim.
Item number 1 is a hearing to consider final passage of amendments to the zoning ordinance, county ordinance code to amend the matrix of allowed uses in Article 2 and adding a chapter cultivation of industrial hemp to enact regulations for the cultivation of industrial hemp pursuant to the industrial hemp pilot program concept and recommending the Board of Supervisors take the following actions. 1, find that the adoption of this ordinance is exempt under the California Environmental Quality Act. 2, adopt and authorize the chair to sign an ordinance amending Title 130 of the county zoning ordinance. And 3, direct staff to return to the board 1 year following the effective date of the ordinance for an update on the pilot program. So as a Parlin, could you please open the hearing?
I open the public hearing.
Good afternoon, Charlene Carveth, Agricultural Commissioner. So this industrial hemp pilot program would be for a 2-year period and consist of 5 or less cultivators. The licenses would be issued for 1 year, which would coincide with the state registrations. And cultivation would be limited to planned agriculture, limited agriculture, agricultural grading, or excuse me, agricultural grazing.
So Kim, there's slides on this, and for I would think for the audience present, because we can look at it here, but I'm sure a lot of them can't see that, so it would help.
Okay.
Great.
There we go. Okay, agricultural grazing, rural lands, and residential estate zones.
So you can click.
Yeah, sure. And so for the rural lands and RE zones, that would be a 20-acre parcel minimum. So the program includes identification of sensitive uses, license and application requirements, cultivation requirements, which would also include signage and setbacks, inspections, enforcement, and what we would do for destruction if needed. So there was some policy differences through as we went through this. And the Sheriff's Department had recommended some inclusions from the cannabis ordinance, which was chapter 130.41. And so sensitive uses consistent with that chapter, which would have included a place of worship, some school bus stops, school evacuation sites, to give you an idea. Exclusionary fencing, which was consistent with the cannabis chapter, which would be 6-foot fences, solid fences, gates, locking, and things like that. And a security plan, which would have included lighting, security video cameras, some minimum requirements for those cameras, alarm systems, and ways to secure the hemp storage. And then also setbacks consistent with that chapter, which would be 1,500 feet from sensitive uses and just a general 800-foot setback. Continuing, the Sheriff's Office also wanted to be included with inspections. And they wanted to know promptly any THC concentration of more than 0.3% and be notified. We didn't include that mostly because with the state regulations, as long as it was anywhere from 0.3% to up to 1%, the registrant could actually ask for another test. So we figured that after all of that, then once we knew what was the final, then we could notify the sheriff if need be.
So Charlene, can I ask you a question about the inspections with the Sheriff's Office? Does that mean that the collaboration happens, you go out together and you do an inspection, but not necessarily a lot of random sampling? Or what is the program with the two entities involved?
So their proposal was that they could, if they chose, we could let them know when we were going to go out.
Okay,
Then they could come out with us. Obviously, the applicants would be notified prior to, it would be during business hours.
okay,
And that those kinds of inspections are supposed to be just random, unless it's part of our normal, what's required by regulation. And so, and mostly it would be because they have a lot more experience of knowing what to look for if there was illegal activities than we would.
so would it be collecting samples for analysis in a lab, or would it be field testing? I mean, what extent of on-site work would happen there?
So with them, it really would depend on, I guess, what they would see. They could
Okay.
do some random sampling. They have test kits that would show if it's over 0.3%. And, if that were to happen, then I believe they have to get a warrant and then to do official samplings that would go to a lab.
Okay, all right. So ultimately, a lab test would have to be done before some further action were taken.
That's my
Okay, all right,
understanding,
good.
yes.
Appreciate that.
So the Agricultural Commission met on September 30th, and these were their recommendations, and they had a 7-0 vote for these. And one of them was to modify section 130.43.100, which was definitions. And that was to remove ranch marketing facilities and winery sales and tasting facilities from the sensitive uses, which that's what is in the final here that's before you. License requirements, 130.43.101B6. And that would be, they recommended to remove that the proposed cultivation of industrial hemp will not occur on a parcel or parcels that are being used for commercial cannabis activity pursuant to the chapter 130.41 commercial cannabis. And we left that one in there just to be consistent with the cannabis ordinance, because right now with the way that things are defined in the cannabis ordinance, a premise is equivalent to the parcel. So to keep that equivalent in the hemp ordinance, we left that in there. At some future date, if it gets removed from the commercial cannabis ordinance, then we can remove it from the hemp
Okay.
ordinance. But also we thought, since this is kind of a learning process here, that it would be difficult if we had commercial cannabis and hemp on the same parcel at this point. If we got a complaint or something, it would be much tougher for staff to figure out, say odor even, which one it's coming from. So it made sense to us at that point. And they also recommended in section 130.43.105B, cultivation requirements, to remove the use of activated carbon filtration or equivalent odor abatement control equipment on the air exhaust, a vapor phase odor control system. So we figured for this process right now, there are some other avenues if there was an odor problem that they could follow that were less expensive, and to just leave these specifics out at this point while we're kind of learning how this is going to go. And then section 130.43.106 inspections, remove all references to the sheriff in the code section, which is not in your final, which is also a recommendation of the Planning Commission, which we'll go to next. So the Planning Commission met on October 13th, 2022, and they had a 5-0 vote for approval. And their recommendations in section 130.43.101B4, remove the last sentence regarding aggregating parcels. The discussion there was there was no limit to the number of parcels, so you could end up with 5 parcels, 10 parcels, maybe in a long line, which wouldn't really help you if you were trying to mitigate for some issues. So at this point, they decided to remove that. In section 130.43.105H2, they added a 600-foot setback from a residence located on a residential zone parcel. The discussion there was really, if you had a residential parcel, they really wanted to have a little more space between their house and where the hemp was going to be cultivated. You know, and so that went into the recommendation and in your final.
Even though the residence might be half a mile away, it's just the edge of that parcel? Is that what
So
they're thinking?
do you remember?
I'm sorry, could you
Well,
clarify?
if
your
you had an
question?
RE20 property
Mhm.
and you've got a residence that's kind of in the middle of the property, and yet you have this boundary
Mhm.
of this residential parcel, and the actual inhabited area might be half a mile away, something like that, right?
Mhm.
This would still apply. It has to be 600 feet, even though there's no direct residence closer than that. It's just the residential property line.
No, sorry, Danny Vanderkook, Deputy County Counsel. To clarify how this setback would be measured, it would be between the outer area of the crop to
Okay.
the outer wall of the structure. So it would
Okay.
say, so if the structure is 600 feet within the property line, it wouldn't trigger. The structure could be closer. It just depends on, it's 600 feet between the crop and the outer wall of the structure is where
Got
it
it.
would be
Okay.
measured, not against the property line.
And the structure could be a barn, it could be a shed, it could be,
No, it's as recommended by the planning commission, it's to be a residential structure on
Okay.
residential zone parcels.
so it has to be living space.
Yes. and it has to
600
be-
feet from the living space to where the edge of the crop could be. Okay,
Yes, and the
right.
residential structure itself also has to be located on a residentially zoned parcel. So if it's a living space on another ag parcel, the 600-foot wouldn't apply to. It applied from a crop measured against a living space on a residential parcel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
And the third one in section 130.43.106 A and B, remove references to the sheriff's office. Part of this discussion there was that the sheriff still has authority to go do inspections. We would just have to make it clear to applicants that that is the case. And, you know, if they had probable cause, they could come out there. So staff recommends the Board of Supervisors take the following actions based on the recommendation of the Planning Commission. One, find that the adoption of this ordinance is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act based on CEQA guidelines 15307, 15308, 15060 C2, and 15061 B3. And adopt and authorize the chair to sign ordinance amending the Title 130 of the county zoning ordinance, adding chapter 130.43 cultivation of industrial hemp. And direct staff to return to the board 1 year following the effective date of the ordinance for an update of the pilot program. And then we have one addition. We found there was an error in this draft from an earlier version. So we request the board to in subsection 130.43.101 B10, which is under license requirements, that section B10 to be deleted to remove the reference to a designated local contact, and B11 be renumbered because of that. Excuse me, do you have any questions?
Okay, the buttons are working and Supervisor Novacell's online. So we'll start with, see if she has any questions first. I don't see a hand, but
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. No, I didn't raise my hand, but I can.
sure,
Um,
no worries.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Charlene, for the presentation. Yeah, I know we had some letters, and I think one in particular talked about the difference between a 200-foot setback and the 600-foot setback. And I believe there was some differences between the hemp ad hoc, where they were asking for the 200. Is that correct? And what is your staff recommendation?
Correct. So in the final before you, we have the 600-foot for the, that was suggested by the Planning Commission. We, we are okay with actually either way. 200 foot, makes sense from an agricultural perspective, I can say. But, from a residential perspective, 600 feet makes sense also. So it's, really kind of a tough one.
Well, I kind of recall reading the letter that said that specifically there was a law or something about the, and I apologize, I don't have the letter in front of me, but the right to farm was 200, is that correct? 200 feet in most issues?
So with right to farm, actually, as long as it's an ag zone property, any crop could be planted up to the fence line.
Okay. And would that, and then I think how does that apply with a residential estate that we were talking about?
So they're not covered by the right to farm, and neither is the rural land zoning.
Just the agricultural?
Correct.
Okay, so that gives us the leeway to decide.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's the only question I had. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Supervisor Turnbull?
Yeah, I just want to know, was the sheriff part of any of these meetings that took place with
Yes,
any
they
of
were.
thpre committees?
Yes, they were.
And he gave a presentation, correct or not?
Yes, he gave us some information and prepared stuff for what they would, and that's why I had that in our presentation too.
But can you give me why that you didn't accept the sheriff as a part of this? Or include him as a part of this?
I originally did, but with the Ag Commission recommending not, and then also the Planning Commission recommending not, and so I am just bringing forth what their recommendations were.
Can you ask me why?
Mostly because of property rights is the key phase there. They just didn't want to be able to have anybody just come onto the property without, especially law enforcement, without due process, I guess.
All right, couple of questions. Can you talk about THC on this, and you're talking about Delta 8 and Delta 9. Does anybody know, do you know anything about that at all, or a little bit?
Yes.
My question is the legality of the difference between it and the various versions of it, because basically it's almost the same, because it still can cause harm. And I've been doing some research on this thing, and a lot of states do not agree on the safety and legality of a lot of this that's going on. And it says that hemp, you can get the same amount of THC, and it still has some of the same side effects as cannabis would have. But the problem is with TH9 versus THC, I mean on 8, basically one's legal and one's not. But it gives you, they did some studies on it, and can come up with the same side effects. So I have some concerns about that, especially when you're talking about when you can buy the TH, a lot of this stuff at a gas station or different places and stuff. So my concerns, especially when it comes to children. So can you give me an answer why? Why is one legal and one's not, when it still shows that all the studies that were done shows they're the same kind of side effects?
I think really we're talking about percentage. As long as it's the 0.3 and below, it's federally recognized as being a legal crop. Whereas, cannabis is still, anything above that is considered a Schedule I drug.
Firstly,
federal level, yes.
Go ahead, John. Go
No,
ahead.
that's at the federal level, and obviously the state is different, but
I totally understand, but I just got some concerns, that's all. When doing a lot of research on this, and I find out the differences in it, and they did studies on mice, and it's the same thing. And I'm just concerned about it. And especially when people that are growing cannabis legally, I mean, there's some states that are doing that, and they got different guidelines, but the people that are growing hemp don't. They're not under the same guidelines. So my concerns is that if we're going to grow hemp, or eventually, this county might accept cannabis down the road, we don't know. I think they should be equally recognized, and I think they should still have the same type guidelines. That's my personal opinion, but you know, I mean, it's just some concerns that, and I've been doing a lot of research on it. And especially when you can buy the stuff, you know, at a gas station like they were talking about, it just doesn't make any sense to me, especially when there's children involved.
So help me understand this a little bit, George. The research you're talking about is a national accredited
Yes,
research or something?
yes.
Because I've not seen that. I guess I'd like to know what references you're looking
Yeah, well,
at.
I can, hang on just a minute.
And we don't need to do it right now, but I think that's important to understand because the fact that people sell stuff at gas stations.
Yeah, I know, and that's
A
exactly
legal
what they said.
transaction or an
Yeah,
illegal
yeah,
transaction.
right.
If it's hemp, as far as I understand, that's a legal transaction by federal law, by state law, but it has to be less.
Yeah,
than
anyway, it's the
0.3%.
University of Connecticut of Nursing is what it is.
Okay.
That did the research. And that's what they come to the conclusion with. So I'm just concerned. I don't, you know,
So you're concerned with this as a vaping product? Is that kind of where your concern is, or?
well, I mean, a lot of that, you know, a lot of that can, you know, you can take this stuff, especially, I guess, for like headaches, people that have migraines,
Yeah.
things like that's supposed to help. And especially when pain relievers. So my concern is I don't know. If it's not fair to the people that it says here. Let me back up a little bit. The distinction between A8 and A9 originally came out of the Congressional Farm Bill covering hemp growing and sales. Hemp is defined as a cannabis plant that has less than 0.3 THC or THC by dry weight. Anything that is more concentrated like A9 THC, then it is considered marijuana. Additionally, the Farm Bill said anything else naturally present the hemp plant is legal. That includes A8 THC. It's creating a fight between marijuana and hemp growers. Products classified as marijuana must be sold through dispensaries and pay high taxes, while hemp producers can sell essentially the same product, but without the same regulations. So it's just some of my concerns on this.
Okay.
And it sounds like it's just defining the
Right.
differences,
You're right, the
and
differences.
we're creating the policies right now about
Right,
that,
right.
which does clarify those differences. So,
Yeah.
and the THC level is mentioned in our ordinance.
Right.
So I think we're following what you're saying, I believe.
Yeah.
And then, okay, are you good for now?
Yeah, I'm good. I just got concerns, that's all.
Of course, everyone does. We want to make sure that, you know, our residents are aware of what they're buying and things are labeled correctly, and we don't want children exposed to things that aren't safe for them. And
Right, exactly.
that's
that's
a
my
concern I
biggest
think everyone
concern.
has, and that's why we create policies to make sure that, you know, things are safe. So I think we're on a good track there. Supervisor Heidel?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with the setback, you know, the 200 feet versus 600 feet. Are we expected to be able to gather information from this pilot program to determine what is that sensitive range, i.e. the nasal rangefinder? Because I can see maybe the first year we say, all right, 600 feet to be on the safe side, but let's go out and make some measurements. What's really coming out of these hemp crops? Different prevailing winds, different times and stuff. If we could collect that data, then we'd be able to say, okay, for the second year, perhaps it can be cut back to 300 feet or whatever the data would lead us to. So is that part of the programming?
Yes, that's part of what we want to do during this period.
Okay, because to me, the collection of the data is what's all important. And we didn't get that out of our previous hemp growing process. We just didn't run it like a pilot program. So we don't have the data to be able to make these kind of decisions. So I'm open to that discussion, and I would rather err on the side of having a little bit more protection than less until we get the data. But if we get the data, then I think we have reason to make changes if necessary, you know, in the second year and then wherever this goes beyond that. The second question I had is the limitation of 5 growers, 5 or less. What's the criteria for that? Is it the first 5 applicants who qualify, first come, first serve? Is that what it is?
Yes, yes. It'll
Okay.
be the first 5 that have all their paperwork in and yes, qualify.
So if you had someone apply with this residential condition and it's 500 feet from the property line with the 600-foot boundary, they would be told, no, you can't because there's an adjacent residence within the 600 feet, if that's what we decided on, for at least this initial go around, which would allow the next person who's an applicant to be reviewed and determine their eligibility. Is that how that is expected to work?
Correct, unless that particular neighbor decides to go ahead and give their neighbor a waiver.
Right.
And then we could go ahead.
Okay, so a written waiver is always part of this if the
Mhm.
neighbor's willing to sign on to it. Again, it's a pilot project. We don't know the final parameters, but we're trying to get the data. So
Just one quick clarifying question. The written waiver language is included in the first setback, which is the default property line setback for 200 feet for those that are within on residential, state or rural lands. The language on the written waiver is not under the other setbacks, so it's only that one that has the waiver. So if your board would like to add same language for the other types of setbacks, you could, but right now the waiver is only on the boundary line setback, which is the one, not the, because we have a couple, we have just the general default one, which is the 200, residential use setback, residential structure setback, sensitive use setback, and agricultural crop setback.
So do you see any downside of establishing that same waiver on the other conditions? I don't, at first blush, but maybe there's something there.
Defer department on that.
No, I don't see any problem with
Okay.
extending.
Yeah,
it.
John, I like where you're going, John. I think that makes sense, because I think you're right. We should err on the side of safety and we had similar concerns on how we understand where that difference is. So I think that'd be a good idea.
And does that waiver only run annually with each license, right? So, okay.
Correct. because-
Okay.
So if the 1-year experience was not favorable, it
Right.
wouldn't extend for the second application year. It would, it'd have to be
Correct,
renewed
and
annually.
yeah, the property could sell or anything like
Right,
that, so.
Right.
yeah.
Okay, good.
So that's a good
Yep,
clarification.
good clarification. Yep, yep.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else, Supervisor
No,
Hyde?
I'm done. Thank you.
Supervisor Thomas?
All right. First of all, I want to thank everyone for their work on this, from CDAC to the Ag Commission to your department, Charlene, to County Council, to everyone that has worked on this. This has been a heavy, heavy lift. CAO's office, just everyone. So thank you. And Charlene, I found your presentation this afternoon just really helpful. It was just very clear in wading through everyone's recommendations and changes. So, thank you for setting us up for a productive meeting. So a couple of questions. This is probably for Danny, I'm not exactly sure. So the pilot program is exempt from CEQA because it's limited in duration and scope. If the Board of Supervisors decides at a later date to expand, hemp production in a permanent ordinance, what would be required in the future in terms of CEQA?
I think we need to look at that time.
Okay.
So I'd be hard to give an answer here because we list a couple different exemptions for CEQA, one of which being that the agricultural land is still being used consistent with agriculture use. And the last EIR we had for our general plan did to study agricultural land for use for agricultural use. But I can't fully give an answer on what the later one would be. We'd have to evaluate that as the more permanent ordinance comes about, on what level of environmental review we would determine to be appropriate.
No, okay,
So
all right.
Can I follow up on that really quick? You said ag use on ag lands. What about the residential ones?
I believe those are ones that are currently allowed to use ag already, is my understanding. So I think it's still consistent. So, but maybe you can speak to that a little more too. So.
Yeah, the RL and the RE are all allowed to have agricultural pursuits on them.
So are they like ag by right, farm bill type things? That zoning?
They're not protected by the right to farm, but they are allowed according to their zoning to do agricultural cultivation or animals, things like that.
So that seems to conflict then, right? If they're not part of the farm bill, but yet we're throwing it in with this. It just- So the CEQA, those would definitely probably have to be considered in CEQA then, right? If they're not underneath the farm bill,
The right to farm.
the right to farm, yeah, because that's what we're kind of, this has all been about that, the farm bill, I thought, and the right to farm.
Well,
This is really
and
confusing,
sorry,
yeah.
just to clarify, when we're referring to the CEQA thing, the issue there we're looking at is when we did a last general plan update that did study the different uses and zones in the county, we did study the different we aren't changing those as far as, these are still agriculture zones being used for agriculture uses, including the RERL already had that, and that was previously studied. So that's why we're relying on
Okay.
that. And in parcel, and also when you think about this, the other exemption we're relying on is trying to be more protective to the environment. And there's also an exemption for pilot programs that we're relying on here, because under state law, this is allowed unless we speak. So if we're limiting the potential uses that state law would otherwise allow by only allowing 5 in the county, that also potentially preserves. But again, I think before we consider, we'd have to look at the more permanent ordinance on what we feel would be the appropriate level of environmental review at that time. So.
Okay,
I'd love more data too to
yeah.
help inform that process. All right, my next question is, under this current ordinance that's before us today, the pilot ends January 1st, 2025. What is, and I know that staff's recommendation is to come back in a year for a review to see how we're doing on this. What are the metrics for determining if this is a successful program?
So I think probably it helped to kind of talk about what we would give you an update on at that 1 year period. And so, part of that would be how many registrations or licenses were issued, how many acres were they able to harvest? If they didn't harvest, what happened? Was it insects, weather, things like that? For the sample testing did they all pass? Did, some of them fail? I'll give you that information. Did we have complaints? What kind of complaints were they? Were we able to resolve the complaints at the time? Is it something that we need to, come back and look at, after that 1 year period? Were there any compliance issues with either state or, the local regulations? Law enforcement, we'd want to talk to them. Did they have any calls at the hemp sites? Were they a problem because of the hemp, or was it just something unrelated? Or did they find illegal cannabis there? It's all kinds of things we want to know. Did we generally have any difficulties with just enforcement and, in general between either the ag department or even code enforcement? And then, give you suggested changes. If everything went great, then maybe we would go back and say, hey, let's try the 200 foot, different things like that.
Excellent. Okay, that seems.
I would think the economics would be important too. What did we collect in terms of fees and what was our cost of service? And yeah.
You're right.
Right,
And is this viable for the growers, and how is that doing from an economic standpoint?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
I want to
absolutely.
follow up a little more on that
Sure.
too, so who specifically is being tasked with collecting the data? Because last time we had hemp, and we're still hearing different stories from
Mhm.
different entities within our county of what really happened. And I'm concerned, I'm not sure if we've designated
Mhm.
an entity to gather all this data. That's what we're being told is the whole point of a pilot project. And I know when we had the board's ad hoc committee, we had experts come from, different places. Was that Sonoma State?
Yes.
Yes. And, so that was actually university that was gathering that data very intentionally and specifically. And so do you feel that we're set up or going to be set up to get that kind of data collected in one place?
I think the ag department will be kind of the one tasked with that. We will, be talking to the sheriff's department, talking to code enforcement, even probably, since they usually have the nasal rangers, talking with air pollution to try to gather all this data so that we can, do a good review at that 1 year period.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's really
Good idea.
clear because, that's what we're being told is the whole point is to gather data and it needs to be well done.
Good point.
So pull on it a little bit more.
Okay.
What's the Ag Commission's
Hey,
involvement? in that
John, can you
data
get closer to your mic though, so the world
Okay,
can hear
okay.
you? Yeah.
Sorry. What is the Ag Commission's role in this data collection, data review? What is CDAC's role? Do you see any role for them to interact with the Ag Department?
Of course, we would probably be bringing back information to the Ag Commission as we go along.
Excellent.
And then, CDAC too.
Yeah.
For the economics of it.
Okay.
That makes
Yeah,
sense. Yeah,
I
before
like
it
that.
comes.
I like
comes
that
to
team
us.
approach as opposed to go a year and then here's the data without understanding how it was collected and how it was analyzed and all the other things. So,
That's good to
yeah.
clarify too, because they've certainly been an integral part of this process.
Yes, and we
Yeah.
want to maintain that.
Right, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, two more questions and if we decide to expand hemp production in a permanent ordinance, how much lead time would we need prior to the January 2025 sunset date in order to do it?
And I'll look to Danny for the logistics of the.
Well, it'd be a relatively simple change. If you wanted this to be a permanent ordinance, you would just delete section 130.43.110 and then it becomes a permanent program. It would still be the same process we went through here. You'd need to go to the planning commission first and then the board. I would say at least a month and a half if we're being, but probably more 2 months to just be careful to get all the right dates and all the publication rules and all that. But we rethink that as we get closer to January 1st, 2025, but I'd say it's probably, Dave, you think what month and at least 2 months, maybe? Yeah, so yeah, so a little bit of time, but yeah.
Okay, but
And-
not the onerous process that this was.
Yeah, well, the change involved would be a relatively simple and straightforward change.
Okay.
So,
I think it's important to note too, as Danny indicated in answer to the prior question, that there would obviously be the CEQA component that would need to be analyzed and
Right.
not being
Okay.
able to determine what that process would look like as we sit here today. As you know from other experiences, that can add time to a process.
Oh, that's a really important thing to get on the radar, that as we're looking, if we're looking at expanding this and we'll need to get ahead of that. And so part of the annual review, let's add on the CEQA component to, understand what would be,
Learned,
what
yeah.
would be required of the CEQA process on a permanent ordinance.
I also think it's worth noting that the way the sunset provision in this ordinance has been drafted, it was intended to not put us in kind of the crunch that we are in today.
Okay, good.
Wherein a failure to act would, under our current system, with expiration of the moratorium, would result in application of the default rules applied by the state.
Okay,
Instead, the ordinance that's in front of you today provides that upon the sunset of this pilot program, that there is a prohibition on the issuance of new registrations or licenses within the county. That's not to say that you couldn't then still adopt a permanent program, but I think we're here today under this short time frame because we recognize that failure to act will result in application of the default state provisions. The pilot program has been drafted to avoid that crunch. Should there be something, should we, kind of be delinquent in our ability to get some permanent action in place.
and so if I'm understanding you correctly, let's say we understand that the CEQA process is perhaps, a little more rigorous, that we could easily extend the sunset date of this ordinance to give us more time,
Well, that's
potentially.
potentially, that's not the point I was making, but that is
Okay.
true.
That's what I got out of it too,
Yeah.
so.
The point I was making is that if under the current ordinance, which is scheduled to sunset,
Right,
if that sunset occurs, what you are left with is a prohibition on issuance of
Right.
further licenses.
but we could just easily extend the sunset date to, give us more time to
That is true.
go through a CEQA process or finish up,
Correct.
cross our Ts, dot our Is for a permanent
Right.
ordinance.
I would say that
Okay.
should not be used as a means of perpetually extending it
No.
such that we're avoiding any obligations we may have under CEQA, but we probably do have some latitude in that regard.
I just kind of want to understand the parameters of this. Yeah, okay, great, perfect. And then my last point is in regard to the conversation regarding 600-foot setback. And I appreciate the dialogues thus far. I've given this a lot of thought, and I think what is at issue, while at first it seems perhaps sensible that we have a 600-foot setback from a resident so they're not impacted, I think there's a bigger policy issue at stake here, and that is inherent in our right to farm. El Dorado County has already established the policy that agriculture is our culture, and that we have protected the right to farm. And that is a, I think, overriding concern on this. If we start inserting nuisance setbacks for, perhaps you could consider it that.
Yeah.
That denigrates this overarching policy in El Dorado County. Now, what we're talking about is probably along the interface of ag and residential zones. So it's probably not in the heart of agricultural districts. There may be a few parcels perhaps that are dotted in there, but it's probably in the interface. And that's probably where there's an issue. This was brought to my attention. I think I found very interesting that when anyone buys a piece of land, there is a real estate disclosure statement for agriculture protection, that if anyone buys a piece of a house near ag zones land, they have to sign a disclosure that states that the County of El Dorado recognizes a statewide policy to protect and encourage agriculture. It states a section of the county code and states that intensive agricultural activity may take place on agricultural land. Therefore, if the property you are purchasing is in the vicinity of agricultural land, you may at times be subject to one or more inconvenience and or discomfort arising from the operations on agricultural land. And it lists a host of inconveniences, including noise, fumes, dust, legal pesticide use, fertilizers, farm personnel truck, visual impacts, lighting, operation machinery, and odors. And so I think having this new policy in this ordinance that states that requires a legal crop to have a 600 setback because of a nuisance goes against what we have already stated as a policy in El Dorado County. I think we need to take out that residential 600-foot setback for this pilot program, recognizing that this is a pilot program. Our whole point is to test this and get the data. If we find that it is perhaps wise to include a setback, whether it's 200 feet or 600 feet, let us talk about that with data. But to start out at the get-go, I think is a slippery slope in terms of a policy decision. And so I think that we could always add it back in, but I think it goes against the heart of who we are. And it, what's the word? It attacks our right to farm that we've already established. So that's where I'm going with that.
And it really introduces another category, RE adjacent to ag, which is where the crop is grown, as opposed to rural lands, or RE where the crop is actually grown adjacent to other RE or rural lands, right? So there is a differentiation there, if I understand it right. So, because the right to farm is only with ag
With
zoning, correct?
But if you buy a house, right, abutting an ag
I
parcel,
understand.
yeah, and you have real estate disclosures that, understand what you're buying. It's a slippery slope when people want to enjoy the benefits of beautiful agricultural district,
Right.
but don't want the impacts. And that's a slippery
What I'm
slope.
suggesting is the setback could be 200 feet when you have the crop grown on ag land and you have RE or rural lands adjacent to it versus you're growing the crop on those other categories, not ag,
Right.
right? Because there's a higher probability you're going to have a nuisance issue when you have RE growing next to an RE and as opposed to ag and RE adjacent, right? So you could create two separate setbacks, one at 200 feet consistent with the right to farm,
Right.
one at 600 feet when you're talking about other than ag land as being where the crop is grown,
Right.
and you have adjacent rural or RE properties.
And right now we're talking about 5, crops. So I
Small
say
number,
we
yeah.
leave it out of this one, but
Okay,
then we address it when we look at a more permanent ordinance, when we have data to inform that decision.
we're
That's
gonna
kind of
get-
where I
yeah,
think
okay,
we need
all
to go
right.
with that.
I got a question. So you're saying that you want it 200 feet is what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that we take out section provision number 3 in section 130.43.105. It's the residential setback.
Okay.
And it is on page,
So residential only?
yeah, let me find it. Setbacks. It's on page 16 of 20, number H3. The residential structure setback that no less than 600 feet from a permitted residential structure that is located on a parcel zoned as multi-unit. It's RM, or it lists a host of residential uses. And so I think we just take out that provision right there. So we have the data to inform on that decision.
Can you give me a reason why?
I thought
Well, I mean, you just the right to farm. Is that what you're kind of
It's
getting
a-
to?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely,
All right.
absolutely. It's setting a dangerous precedence that goes against the policy that we have already established as a county, that we are an agricultural county.
Mhm.
And people living in that agricultural interface need to understand what they're buying into.
Well, but I'm going to counter that. So if you've already lived here prior to today, I guess, prior to this new crop, you didn't buy into, I mean, we knew what the crops were, you
Sure,
know, and
sure.
so this is new.
I
and
get
it's
that.
different. And we do know that there are odors with this crop. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Every committee, everything you read about it, this crop has odors. So I just think we need to be careful about that and somebody's residents, because on the flip side, I've always felt, I mean, this is why I'm here in this chair right now, is because I don't support the county creating policies that become a nuisance for neighbors. And we need to be cognizant of that and careful that we're not creating nuisances. I kind of like where Supervisor Heidel was going earlier about kind of having tighter to start. You can always loosen things up as you go. And I was going to ask if the board would consider tightening it up even more so. And here's where I was going to go. During any of these meetings, Charlene, was there ever a map presented to show which parcels may or may not choose to participate? A map?
No.
So we really don't even know where this may or may not happen.
Correct.
Okay, so I started poking around a map earlier today, just to take a look where this could happen. And there are RE5 parcels that are 20 acres or more. I'm not even talking about combining. I'm just talking about existing in residential areas, or what I think in El Dorado County you would consider residential. There's, you know, in LA, they wouldn't call it residential. You know what I mean? It's like, we consider that residential where it's mostly primarily houses. RL also, same thing. I went poking around and there's parcels in areas that are just considered neighborhoods. They're not ag areas. So if we approve this the way it is today, and I know we're only talking about 5, but we're hoping to establish something that's meaningful, maybe to carry on with
Right,
beyond.
right.
So, and I do think it is better to start down a little tighter and loosen up later if we find there's
Going
not.
the other way.
I know. I mean, generally speaking in life, isn't it easier? Reining things in is harder. So anyway, so I'm very concerned about including RE5 or RE at all, because there are already REs out there that are 20 or more, and they're not in ag districts. So what I was wondering is, would the board consider tightening this up so that parcels must be within an ag district? We have established ag districts. To me, that makes sense to start there because this is all about ag. I do have the ag map if anybody wants to see it. It was hard to find, you guys. It was super hard to find. Let me see if I can
Yeah, that'd be good.
find it. But I'm just thinking that we should be thinking about really, and I'm concerned that we didn't have maps throughout all of this of where parcels might be. I'm going to try and share my screen. So let's see how this goes. I think it's going to.
I think you need to make you a co-host.
Nice, nice. Okay, great.
So I hope this is an accurate current map too. I don't remember where I found it, but like I said, it was not easy to find. But those are our ag districts within the county.
So can
And-
you help define the green versus the blue? I'm trying to read it.
Oh, sure.
I'm not seeing the legend because
It's down below. Hold on.
Yeah.
If this is the current map, the green are existing ag districts,
Yeah.
and then the blue, it says additions were
Yeah,
proposed.
they were added during the last.
Okay, so
Okay.
all of this now, the green and the blue. So this is not a current map. My
Okay,
bad.
all right.
I
Yep.
tried.
Yep.
Um, So in my mind, this would at least be a reasonable place to start, since we're saying this is all about ag.
Mhm.
Let's keep it in our ag districts, because I'm telling you, if, can you see my cursor is kind of tiny, but there are parcels out all over outside of the ag districts that are RE or RL actually, that are 20 acres or more.
Yeah.
And we might be spreading this out more than we thought. And I'm just concerned that we didn't have a map all along. So
And those parcels
Um,
are not under the right to farm? Is that what you said?
So, right, REs and RLs are not under the right to farm.
Okay.
but if there is everything within an ag district right to farm
No.
even? Oh, well, it's closer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It maybe implies it.
So
Yeah.
help us understand the difference between being in an ag district and not having the right to farm. I'm kind of lost on that one.
So right to farm is really tied to the zoning.
Okay.
The ag
Specifically.
district is kind of an overlay to help protect those key agricultural lands. So you can't reduce your parcel size below a certain amount, things like that. So it's more of land use that way versus the right to farm.
Got it. Okay.
So
So,
Lori,
yeah.
would you be amenable to taking out the 600-foot residential setback if we add that only parcels within ag districts could be considered for the pilot project?
that might be a good trade-off. I'm trying to figure out if that's. I wish
Just
we had
think
looked
about
at,
it.
yeah, I know, I
don't
wish
think
we had
that's
looked at
fine. So
map
we'll get public
sooner.
comment and just kind of throw it
Yeah.
out there. So
Do we have a map of just like RE anywhere that we can just see really quick? I should have thought of this weeks ago and I just didn't. This morning I was like, where is this gonna be? That's what
The
happened.
surveyors can
Yeah.
usually do those maps.
Okay.
So the previous hemp growing that we had, were any of those done other than in ag zoned properties?
Yes,
They were.
yes.
Okay, so applicants might be coming forward who have either rural lands or RE zoning where the crop was grown that would be excluded by this decision, it sounds like, right? Do you know
Possible.
roughly how many? Was it one, two?
I want to say there was 2 or 3 that were.
Okay. All
of
right.
that
So we just need to
zoning.
recognize that's one of the conditions that would be imposed. Okay.
But in my mind, this just makes, I don't know, a little bit of sense that we've designated these are ag districts. I mean, there's even signs on the road when you enter one, so that makes more sense to me than having it just anywhere, because out here, people aren't, don't have the same expectation.
and they don't have the same disclosures and knowledge either.
Right.
That's
So
interesting.
anyway, just when I was out looking at maps, that's where my brain went. So something to think about. This might help allay some concerns maybe about neighbors. I'm not sure.
Okay.
And then I think that was that was really the biggest thing that I wanted to ask the board if you would consider that, just limiting it to ag districts to start. It made sense, but then I don't know about setbacks within. It's like, I don't know.
Supervisor Perlman, just a point of clarification that if you did go that way, you would also likely need to H1, the boundary line setback only applies to hemp grown on residential. So if we're not having that there, then there would not be a reason to have that in the ordinance. So that would also be stricken. So there might be some conforming we need to be there. So if you wanted to take out the RE and RL, they're the only ones who get the setback under H1. So.
Okay, see, and I'm not really clear on this because it sounds like there can be RE and RL within an ag district, right?
Mhm.
So
Right.
that's where it gets a little confusing, but yeah. I know. Sorry, I love maps.
Yeah.
Because you can see.
Can I quick clarification? It looked like
Yeah.
H2 and H3 when I'm looking at the ordinance. Is that correct?
What's that again, Supervisor Novosel? You're looking at what?
The ordinance H2 and H3 would have to be modified.
Oh,
I just wanted to clarify that when county council was talking about H2, I believe, and H3 is residential setbacks also.
I don't believe you need to modify those two because H1 is because you want to look at, when you're looking at setback, you're looking at two different parcels. So on one side, we're looking at about what is the parcel, how is the parcel growing the hemp, what is it zoned as, and then what it's being set back against. H1 is the one that has a setback specific to hemp grown on residential estate or rural lands. H2 and 3 is how any hemp crop is set back against residential or residential structures respectively. So
Okay.
yeah, they serve slightly different functions.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Thank you.
Okay. So do you want to get some public
Yeah.
comment and then we'll bring it back to the board and figure it out?
Sounds good.
All right, Kim.
Now taking public comment on item number 1. Individuals will have 3 minutes to address the board. The timer will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining to comment. Public comment will be taken first from those participating in the boardroom and then from those participating through Zoom. For those participating by Zoom, please make sure you unmute yourself when called upon. If you're joining the meeting by phone, press *9 to indicate a desire to comment. If you're joining by Zoom, press the raise hand button. Please voluntarily state your name for the record. I'm sorry, could you just turn the mic on? Sorry. Push.
Good afternoon. Lexi Boger with Community Economic Development Advisory Committee and the Joint Working Committee on hemp. I will not be up here saying a lot and taking up all your time. I would just want to clarify the one issue that seems to be super confusing. In the draft that you're looking at, it is 0 setbacks on ag land, 200-foot setbacks on residential, and a proposed 600-foot setback directly from a residence to the crop. From our point, this is an ag ordinance. So if it makes people feel better to just, pull it out of residential zones altogether. I think what we're concerned about is eroding right to farm on ag lands. So we're really requesting no setbacks on an ag zoned parcel. What is happening in residential, if the crop's on an RE parcel, they're not protected. So whatever makes people feel more comfortable in that sense. And then in terms of the ag districts, those are really quite small in the belt of our ag swath. So there's a lot of ag land that you would be cutting out of the program if you were to just restrict to those zones. So our recommendation would be, let's just say, protect right to farm on ag zones, and then with the RE, do whatever is comfortable for you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lexi. David Bolster, Vice Chair of the Ag Commission. First of all, thank you to the board. Thank you to the Planning Commission. Just from that 30,000-foot policy view, part of this process for me has been reaffirming the board and the Planning Commission, El Dorado County support for agriculture, and we've done that. So, whatever iteration of the ordinance you pass today, we appreciate it. Thank you for supporting agriculture. Once again, we have a great history of the board and Planning Commission supporting ag. So thank you. And I thank Supervisor Parlin for bringing up a pet project of mine and the Ag Commission. They get tired of me promoting the idea of creating a new ag district down South Shingle Road. Thousands of acres of gorgeous, not only grazing land, but very good ag land from Highway 50 all the way down South Shingle Road to Latrobe. Greg would help me this. There's a vineyard down there, Bob. Anyway, beautiful vineyard down there, 100-acre property that I worked with about 10 years ago. Just an absolutely gorgeous property. And that would be, a great industrial hemp property if you put it in the right place. So thank you. And someday, hopefully, the board will create a new ag district down there. I'm just here basically to reaffirm the Ag Commission's view of the draft ordinance. Once again, we support the draft ordinance, and that, with the exception of that one item where we recommended the setbacks that Lexi described, 200 feet against residential properties, ag to ag, no setbacks. Again, it's a micro pilot program up to 5 permittees. And I would remind the board that a 600-foot setback translates into a very large growing parcel. With cannabis, that 800-foot, you're looking at a 70 to 80 acre minimum parcel. One of our previous growers today, David Hardy, has a 57-acre parcel. Questionable whether you could squeeze that in with a 600-foot setback. Maybe, maybe not. So basically, again, right to farm, it's our basic primary tool for protection of agriculture, to sustain our viable ag lands. It's been in place for a long time. And it's that precedent slippery slope issue. If we're creating a precedent here today for a crop that generates odor, or is a subdivision next to the Nielsen family, next to the 3,000 or 5,000 acre Nielsen ranch, the people in the subdivision are going to get together, see what we've created here, and go force the Nielsens to push their operations back because cattle create odor. So it's the precedents, the slippery slope issue that we're concerned about. And that would be the Ag Commission's primary concern. And I think we also support Lexi's suggestion that if the board wanted to remove production on any residential properties, we would support that as well.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Gabe. The sound is not working. Kim's gonna have to say it today. Sorry, everyone. It's so nice when the timer's working.
Greg Boger, Chairman of the Ag Commission and growing grapes for 50 years. I want to just thank you for all considering this new crop. Farming, as you know, is unpredictable. Look at this year. We had two serious frosts. The whole apple crop was lost. We lost 30–40% of our vineyards. So it only makes sense to do this pilot project. If there's another crop that can help growers, we want to keep our ag land. So let's at least do this experiment, see if this crop works. And then it's a backup, if nothing else, to keep our farmers prosperous so they can go another year and continue with their other operations. But hemp can be an in and out kind of crop. It's a 1-year crop. So let's at least make it available. We don't want to lose our ag lands to subdivision. So let's work on this. And so don't make this thing so onerous that there won't even be any applicants for doing this project. Let's be liberal, as Chuck Bach in our meeting said. Let's be liberal in this and see where we go. And then you can tighten down if you do find problems, or at least you can resolve your problems. So at any rate, thank you for consideration and for all the hard work that CDAC and the Ag Commission and everyone has put into it. And Charlene's long and laborious 2 years on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else in the room?
I'd like to introduce myself, David Hardy. Let's see, for the 2 years of 2019, 2020, I did grow industrial hemp in Somerset on my 57-acre parcel. We had no problems with the odor complaints, no trespassing, no issues with law enforcement. I do want to make that, I want to emphatically mention that because of the perception in other parts of the county, the negativity associated with cultivation of industrial hemp. I do want to say that the agricultural department staff is overly trained with their ability to manage this crop. Their testing, their observation, their GPS, locating parameters, description of the property on which the premise on which the crop will be grown is finite. It is identified with GPS locators. It is measured length and width. It's translated into square feet. Over and over, it's confirmed and identified as a finite growing area. Anything grown outside of that GPS area is not industrial hemp, it's marijuana. So if you are familiar with the California Department of Food and Agriculture regulations, they're very explicit about what is and what isn't hemp. I do want to make one more observation that in this description of where the hemp would be grown, it's associated with parcel. It's quite different than other counties and the CDFA as it describes the location where the hemp is grown. They identify it as parcel, not parcel. They identify it as activity area, site, and premise, which is not the totality of the area that one is associated with the parcel. So I want to make sure that you understand how limited you are by passing the regulation based on parcel description and not premise. Thank you.
Is that it? Okay,
Seeing no additional public comment from the boardroom, now taking public comment from Zoom participants. Now taking public comment from 525.
not hearing you. 525.
Do you want me to move on?
Hi, this is Leo Bennett Koshan. Can you hear me now?
Yep, Leo.
Okay. So Shingle Springs, mostly somewhat Tulip Pines where I'm moving. Just wanted to share that my family owns 72 acres agricultural zoned in San Diego County. That property went through many different changes over the years, turkeys, goats, which is what I did. And then we looked at industrial hemp, and at that time it was just way too complicated to do industrial hemp. So I encourage the board to continue its conversation. I think it's great the way you're trying to find a common ground compromise. In our area, it was always about chicken farms, and nobody wants to live next to the chicken farm, but they were there already. So back and forth in terms of odor and all those issues. So I'm hopeful that you'll find common ground, as other folks have said, in order to allow the right to farm. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you, Leo.
Now taking public comment from Lee Tannenbaum.
Yeah, hi, Lee Tannenbaum, CEO Cybel Holdings. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the Planning Commission, the Ag Commission, CDAC, and to the Ag Commissioner for all their hard work to get us here. Thank you very much. Couple things of note. I would agree with Lexi in that if the board wanted to limit this pilot to agricultural land, I would prefer seeing that than to an agricultural district, just because of the way the district maps are laid out, and there's ag lands that don't fall within the agricultural district. Also, wanted to talk briefly about the setbacks. Excuse me. I have a 206 acre parcel, and with the current setbacks for cannabis, and I know we're talking about hemp, but I'm just talking about the setbacks. With the 800-foot setbacks, I have less than 15 acres of usable land on my 200 acres because of those setbacks. So as you're considering the setbacks for the hemp ordinance, I think 600 feet is excessive. If it is from the edge of the crop to the home, I think that's probably doable. And then lastly, I just want to echo what Mr. Hardy said. I would like the board to consider not having an APN tied to a site, but do what every other county in the state has done, which is define a site or a piece of a property to be a specific site and not the entire parcel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee.
Now taking public comment from Tamara Johnston.
Hi, I'm Tamara Johnston, and I'm the chair of CDAC and also a member of the hemp committee. So I've been involved with this process for the past year plus, and I don't need to repeat what other people have said, but I do want to just mention that I think Supervisor Parlin had said that it's easier to start tight and then loosen regulations over time. And I would just caution that approach. I think we see in California that we tend to do the opposite. Start with tight regulations and then pile them on. It's extremely difficult to actually remove regulations. And that is not culturally what we do as a state, and is certainly not what I've seen in El Dorado County as well. So I would urge you to start looser, and then during the pilot program, if there are issues that come up, which is the point of the pilot program, to then tighten them if it's deemed necessary. That's all I wanted to say about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamara.
There's no additional public comment.
All right, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Who wants to start? Because we got a lot of input. It's on us to figure this out.
So I do have a question relative to a couple of last speakers that talked about not making it parcel specific, but making it area designated specific. Is there a reason in setting this up? Did we look at other counties, and are we truly the only oddball county in looking at parcels? And is there a good solid justification for that?
I think we probably are one of the few that are looking at it for parcel. And right
Okay.
now it's just because that is the way our cannabis ordinance is set up.
Okay.
And so even if we did not do that in this ordinance, if they were a cannabis licensee, they still could not do hemp at this point because of the definitions in the cannabis ordinance.
So in the future, we might want to look at transitioning to something more consistent with, sounds like the larger number of counties have gone to, and it would affect both the cannabis ordinance, it sounds like, as well as the hemp ordinance at that time, whatever it is. So, okay, I appreciate that input.
Just one quick clarification there. There are other counties that do prohibit this.
Okay.
Lake County has a similar prohibition. Monterey County, who's the other one who's taking a pilot program, actually has a much broader prohibition where it's 3 miles. The hemp can't be grown within 3 miles of cannabis. So we would not be the only one out there on this particular issue.
Okay.
Oh,
Good to know. Good to
that's
know
not
the
what I was,
reference.
okay, now I'm really confused. I didn't understand the difference between an APN parcel and a premise. Isn't that what you
Sure,
were?
I can provide you with more clarity on that. So under state law, there's a Food and Ag Code section 81006C provides that you cannot grow industrial hemp on the same premise licensed by the Department of Cannabis Control. And that refers back to the cannabis regulations for definition of premise. The cannabis state law on cannabis defines premises to be means the designated structure or structures and land specified in the application that is owned, leased, or otherwise held under the control of the applicant or licensee, where the commercial cannabis activity will be or is conducted. So when we're talking about premise and parcel, a premise can be larger than a parcel. A premise could span multiple parcels. It could be smaller than a parcel.
Right.
It's the area that is licensed. Now, where there is in our cannabis ordinance, it defines premises to mean parcel. So that's the potential inconsistency there, because when we set up our cannabis ordinance, we did say premise means the whole parcel. So.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, and I know the
then?
planning
Okay,
commission, the Ag Commission wrestled with us and
Yeah.
had consistent recommendations for us. So that's consistent with this ordinance.
okay.
Great. As far as a 600-foot setback, perhaps a very easy solution for this pilot program would be under section 105H3. That's the setback provisions. To an item number 3, just add a sentence at the end of that this setback shall not apply to ag zoned land. And that, if there's, that still leaves the RE and the RL in there, and the 600-foot square back, where did I get that? Setback would apply to those, but it just wouldn't apply to ag zone lands, as is consistent with our right to farm. So I think that's
So Danny, would you concur with that there's no other provisions in this that would have to change?
If you're wanting to make the residential structure setback specific to.
the setback shall not apply to ag zoned lands.
So I think then by not apply, I think we're referring to ag zone, we're referring to where the crop is grown, correct?
Right.
Okay, so if you would like to do that, I also think what you could do is under H1, if you take the first
Yep.
sentence, the other, we already do that very similar in H1. So you could take the same language and drop it below, because in the first sentence, it says that if you're on ag land, no setback under this subsection, so the boundary line 1. But if you're on residential estate or residential or rural lands, there is a setback. So you could take the same language and drop it below, and that would make the residential
I
structure.
I think that'd be good for clarity. That's good.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I would agree. We need to have,
Okay.
make sure it's consistent,
Consistent,
and not
Yeah.
contradictory in different sectors. And that's why I was wanted to get Danny's input, just to make sure that we covered all the i's, dotted the i's and crossed the t's with this, because you make one change and sometimes it ripples. So
Great. Okay.
I would be amenable to that kind of a motion, but I think we're still in discussion mode. Any other thoughts from other supervisors on that
Well, the
proposal?
only concern I have is not including the sheriff, because I mean, with it, there's a lot of criteria here that I think that he should have been included in it. And that's my only concern. So I can understand the setbacks. I think the 600 feet, I think we need to leave it there. And then if it works out better, then we can always bring it back, smaller. But I'm just concerned about it a little bit. I just think the sheriff should be a part of it. I don't think it should be that he should be excluded on any of this.
So let me, I got a question related to that for Charlene, if that's okay.
Yeah. That's fine.
How much involvement will the sheriff have with the information we're collecting? So we talked about the Ag Commission. We talked about CDAC. Is the sheriff going to be party to the metrics you're collecting and understanding as we go, or are they only going to participate when a visit's conducted? I guess I'm just trying to understand what level of ongoing communication will happen there.
Well, we anticipated to did like we did before, and that, let them know where all the sites are. Once again, whatever information that they want as we go along, which could include all the testing information and things like that. So, and how often we go out.
So to me, that's keeping the sheriff involved. And again, after a year, if we find out we have to make changes for the second year of the pilot, or the pilot ends, or whatever it is, I think this board has that ability. So I'm willing to try this and with some openness and see what happens to it. But I think the sheriff's getting the data and being involved with the inspections is the right step at this point. So
I think that, this is always a tricky issue. And of
Yeah, it
course,
is a tricky issue.
we value our law enforcement in El Dorado County. But to me, it gets down to a Fourth Amendment issue. And, in the Fourth Amendment, it talks about that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants issued but upon probable cause. And this gets back to the fact that hemp is a legal crop. And so I think with the compromise that is inherent in this, and of course, if there is an issue, the sheriffs and law enforcement partners, have right to go on if there's probable cause. But this is a legal crop, and I think we've worked out an effective compromise on that issue.
So
That protects
Can you
property rights.
say what the compromise is so that I've got it in my head? What did we come up with today so far?
Well, we didn't add anything else to the ordinance as far as law enforcement.
But I mean, so are we going to consider, so like Lee Tannenbaum said, he didn't like the idea of restricting it to the ag districts because there's unfortunately different types of zoning sprinkled throughout. I really don't want it out in residential areas that are RE. So would the board consider not including RE and RL since those aren't protected by the Farm Bill
We
use,
could do that. We could do that.
and just keep it on ag lands only
And then take the setback off of that for this pilot program.
and see how that goes?
That'd
There
work
still
with
could be some conflicts though, because if you have an ag parcel next to some type of residential,
Right.
and if you're not going to have any setbacks, so
But
I know.
like the idea of a cattle ranch, this ag is stinking on. My understanding is that
Yeah.
there's only an odor for about 4 weeks. Is it, how long is the odor season on this? It's not like,
I
12
would
months.
say 4 to 6 weeks
4 to 6 weeks,
approximately, yeah.
Whereas a cattle
height.
ranch is stinky all the time.
Yeah.
So
So, well, and again, we're introducing something different and new, and I don't know if you guys remember, I wasn't on the board then, but when we were doing all the cannabis hearings and the families that came in, with the smells and how they were impacted then, I don't want that again, ever. It was awful.
Just as a point of clarity, Chair, are you suggesting we take F and for permitted uses, it's a cultivation, only on, you're saying on agricultural, so would that be PALAAG?
Yeah,
And
I think those
taking out-
are the ones, right?
And then taking out the residential, estate RE and, rural lands also?
Yes, taking those out. Because if we don't want to just keep it, I guess that's where my brain was thinking that doing the ag districts would be more contiguous perhaps, keeping a whole area.
but if it doesn't capture.
But if
all of
it, I know,
yeah,
that's the
the
problem is the zoning is sprinkled throughout, I guess. So, and that's where I wish I'd thought of looking at maps sooner, but I didn't. So, yeah, that's something to think about.
I guess, knowing that there were some hemp growers that were, well, say boutique hemp growers for the purposes of providing a specialty CBD type of thing that was done in smaller parcels. I doubt if they were zoned ag. It seems like we're overly restricting things at the onset. And once you do that, you probably never get the opportunity to open it up again. And so I've got mixed feelings about, just restricting it to ag lands versus going forward with this and allowing the appropriate setbacks that were defined, so that, ag is protected. But still, if somebody wants to grow on RE or RL on one of those categories of lands, that they would be given an opportunity in this pilot program to attempt that and to monitor it and see if that's what it is. Because again, once you restrain it up front, it's difficult to open it up to something more expansive in the future. Like going to RE or RL lands, if you restrict it in the pilot, you probably never get to there, is my opinion. But maybe that's okay when it's all said and done.
Well, and once again,
I know, and it's tough because I think
don't know.
our expert during our ad hoc, the board's ad hoc actually said to make sure we had something really tight. And then you can always expand later.
Yeah, I mean-
So, and again, it's, I don't know.
It's a judgment
really
thing.
hard
It's
to
tough
know,
to-
but
tough
I
to read
did,
it, but-
I did heed those words from him. So,
Well, and that's, if you don't mind, that's kind of why I was asking, because I feel that when you get down to H, it does address those concerns about being too close to residential, no matter where they are. So I'm okay with leaving those other two definitions in there because I think the setback will help. And yeah, if we need to go to more strict, I think anywhere between 200 and 600, depending on where we fall. I think that allows for at least to take a look, as the pilot program should, is take a look at some of these options and see what works and then take out what doesn't work. That's the whole idea of a pilot program. So I was a little concerned about taking out specific areas that are already in there.
right. But Supervisor Thomas was talking about taking out the setbacks in H
I
that
feel
you were just
very-
talking about.
yeah,
So
I feel-
there it is. There's our conflict.
Right. Yeah.
very strongly about the 600 square foot setback. And once again, we are only talking about five parcels that can take part in this pilot program. So once again, I really think that the opportunity for a lot of residents to be affected by this is very little. Once again, this is a learning opportunity. The larger issue at stake is the slippery precedence that this sets that allows people to view agriculture as a nuisance. And especially as people come up to this area, we're attractive, to the Bay Area, they perhaps want to enjoy the benefits of a beautiful agricultural district, but they don't want to be impeded by the logistics of a working farm, of a working landscape. And once again, it is critical that we preserve that working landscape that is not always pleasant. And we cannot allow agriculture to be considered a nuisance. Let us study this. And then when we look at perhaps opening up a permanent ordinance, we will have the data to know, is what setback is appropriate, if any, what's economical, what's not. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. So, I'm okay with taking out RE and RL. If the majority of the board wants to leave it in, I still feel that we need to remove the 600-foot setback on ag zoned lands. We can leave it on the RE and REL. In fact, I think that would be critical, because if it truly is a
I think
residential
that's where you
zone
started
land,
with your proposal to
Right.
amend the ordinance,
but
right?
keep the setback
Yeah.
on the RE and RL. If you feel strongly that those be included in this, pilot program, but remove it from the ag zone lands.
And yeah, and I tend to think, that's what we're talking about impacts to residential without losing our, one of our main industries and our love for agriculture. So yeah, how do you find that? And yeah, I think guys are going in the right direction here. Do you take it? Oh, do you take out residential completely, or do you just put a setback on there? That therein lies the question here. And I'm okay with looking at setback, just because that kind of at least opens it up enough to try to study it. Otherwise, you just completely take it out, then you're not going to really understand the impacts.
Right.
I got to ask a question to Charlene. Now, if we don't adopt this pilot program, we fall under the state regulations,
Correct.
which could happen. The state regulations is basically less impacts, correct? Or is it more restrictive or not?
Oh, the state regulations have no land use, any sort of regulations to it. So it could potentially go anywhere.
So it can be, they can build these things right next to schools. So there's no restrictions or nothing.
Correct.
That's good clarification, George.
Yeah, that's what I
important
wanted to know.
That's important. to know.
Which is why we want to control it through
Exactly.
the
Right,
pilot
right.
program and not let the state, impose their.
So I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we accept, well, actually, I'm just going to go
Yeah.
through here. Yeah, for clarity's sake.
I know.
right?
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. That we, number one, find that the adoption of this ordinance is exempt under the California Environmental Quality Act based on CEQA guidelines 15307, 15308, 15060C2, and 15061B3, and adopt and authorize the chair to sign an ordinance amending Title 130 of the County Zoning Ordinance, adding Chapter 130.43, cultivation of industrial hemp, with the provision that we add language under Section 130.43, 105H3, under cultivation requirements, that this setback shall not apply to ag zoned lands. And 3, direct staff to return to the board 1 year following the effective date of the ordinance for an update on the pilot program, and add staff's recommendation number 4. And Charlene, help me out with what that was.
On subsection 130.43.101B10, to remove the reference to a designated local contact, and B11 be renumbered.
Thank you.
To be clear, I think it's deleting all of B10.
Yes.
Great.
So I'll second for discussion. I want to make sure Danny's comment about if we change F, that there's another, if I understood it right, for consistency.
Yeah, I just want to make clear. So your Supervisor Thomas, for your motion, RE and RLs, that's retaining in the ordinance. You're not taking that out.
Right, I'm not taking that out. And so the 600-foot residential setback would apply to those lands.
Right.
But the 600 residential setback will not apply to ag zone land. And so whatever that needs, however the ordinance needs to be amended to reflect that.
Yeah, we can add that in. I also want to just briefly say at the beginning of this discussion, there was a couple of the board members, Supervisor Heidel mentioned on the ability for the setback not apply if there was written consent from the owners to apply to all the setbacks and not just
The waiver,
line.
yes.
Okay.
So we can add that in, but I just want to make sure we capture that in the motion. So That was discussed a little bit at the beginning. We haven't discussed it.
Oh, yeah, that needs to be in this.
Needs to be in the whole thing, that there is a adjacent property owner's waiver of their rights to allow the reduction or elimination of the setback, something that's consistent with their ability to say, I'm okay with this, but they have to be assigned waivers. I understand. That's one of the sections it's in, but we've added to all the appropriate sections. If I understood what Nanny was
And so
referring to.
amend, add to my motion number 5, that we make the waiver, gosh, let's see, adjacent property waiver consistent throughout the ordinance. How would you word that, Danny?
Sure, I think I would.
Sorry, Kim.
No, I can probably send, I think probably the easiest thing is if we just take the language that is in currently H1B and drop it down to the other ones. So if you add into the setbacks imposed by H2 through H4, that the setback will not apply with respect to a particular parcel if the licensee obtains written consent from all owners of any adjacent parcels that are impacted by the setback. And we could drop that in. We could take the longer sentence, about 3 sentences, so describing what that works. So, but we can take it and drop it there. So, I guess maybe we can add it just at the very end, saying that for all setbacks imposed by this subsection,
That would be the other way to do it, as opposed to specifically
Yeah.
identifying each, make just an overall statement,
yeah. So
whichever is easiest
there might be
to.
a little bit of wordsmithing that we need to do. So,
Yeah.
So county council, what do we need to add?
To the direction, yeah, to this motion.
Motion that is clear.
So if the board's willing, and if it seems like there's some general consensus around this motion, if the board is willing, it is, sorry. You turn up the gain on this thing. I know we have a closed session to hear. If the board was willing to trail this until the conclusion of that closed session so that Danny and Charlene could conform these revisions to make sure that this is clearly captured. I would just hate to miss something here. And so if the board is willing to do that, and if there's it seems that there's some general consensus around what's being proposed, I think we'd appreciate that opportunity.
And then when we come back from closed session.
Correct. Yes, we'll come back into
We'll
closed
reread
session.
the motion
Correct.
Resume this.
and then vote on it. So
That would be my
clarity.
recommendation.
All right,
Okay.
that sounds good. It's important we get this right. So,
Yes.
okay, great, thank you.
So with that,
So with that, Madam Chair,
I'm like going,
if you're amenable, I would suggest that you then trail this item until the conclusion of closed session, which I'm assuming we can complete in probably 15 to 20 minutes. That should provide staff the opportunity to prepare the motion in a way that can be captured by the clerk. So then we'll recall this item at that point in time, and the board will be able to take its final action.
I haven't gotten to trail something yet. This is awesome. So, okay, with that, then, with the board's consensus, it looks like we'll trail this item. And then we're going to go into closed session. In my blurb that I'm supposed to read, I don't have with me. Can I kind of make it up? So at this time, the board will consider item number 2 on the agenda as specified. Anyone wishing to make comment on item number 2 should do so at this time.
Now taking public comment on closed session item number 2. Individuals will have 3 minutes to address the board. The timer will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining, or I will. Public comment will be taken first from those participating in the boardroom and then from those participating through Zoom. For those participating by Zoom, please make sure you unmute yourself when called upon. If you're joining the meeting by phone, press *9 to indicate a desire to comment. If you're joining by Zoom, press the raise hand button. Please voluntarily state your name for the record. Seeing no public comment from the boardroom, now taking public comment from Zoom participants. Now taking public comment from 525.
Hi, this is Leo Bennett Cochon again. I've addressed my concerns about your utilization of the closed session exception, which is narrowly construed. Your county council disagrees with me, which is fine. Everybody has different perspectives. I urge you to hold this session in public. From my perspective and everyone I've talked to in the First Amendment Coalition and so forth, the narrow exception requires it to be very specific. Chief Administrative Officer recruitment is not specific, it's general. Not sure why you need to talk about this in closed session. Perhaps your agenda item is not clear. I will take up the county consul's generous offer to discuss with him, but currently I'm advising you that my concern is raised to the level to file a secure and correct letter, because I believe the public should be informed about your recruitment process. And this closed session doesn't meet the standard in my experience and consultation with others. Again, it's all good, just different perspectives. The Brown Act is a minimal standard for open session, as I'm sure you're aware, and local bodies can hold themselves to a higher standard, which I feel you do quite consistently. So I urge you to spend the 15 minutes in open session, if it's appropriate in terms of recruitment, which to me doesn't seem to need a closed session. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you, Leo.
Now taking public comment from Chris.
Good afternoon, board. Yesterday at the Taxpayers Association, there was some general discussion among many items. The auditor controller was the speaker about the cost of the chief administrative officer. And we were relating it to both salary and benefits. But I think in the recognition that the cost is apparently what the market can bear, and I would say that in a very positive way, the notion that we would hire somebody who isn't the best because of the cost, I think is not the way to go. Certainly there are people out there that might want to take the job, including people that are currently working for El Dorado County, that may be or may not be the most qualified individual. But in the regards to your deliberation, I think generally the notion would be to get the best person, not the best person for the money. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris.
There's no additional public comment.
All right. County Council would like to respond.
No, if you don't mind, Madam Chair, I do think it's important for the public to recognize, and Mr. Koshan in particular, that the Brown Act specifically allows the agency to hold a closed session to consider the appointment, employment, evaluation, performance, discipline, or dismissal of a public employee. The Attorney General has very clearly stated that the consideration of candidates for a position is certainly within the scope of the closed session for appointment. It's been properly agendized. I appreciate he disagrees, but I feel very confident that the scope of the discussion is appropriate under closed session. So I just wanted to note that for the public.
Thank you. So noted. All right, with that, we will go into closed session. Thank you. All right, we're back from closed session. County Council, do you have anything to report out?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The board met in closed session and heard item number 2. There is no action to report out.
All right, very good. Then we will go back to item number 1. And I understand that there was some language drafted for us to look at to make sure that what we're approving is what we think it was. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I'll go ahead and read the motion, and at the same time, I'm going to share my screen so you can kind of see what's being proposed. So a motion was made by Supervisor Thomas, second by Supervisor Heidel, to 1, find that the adoption of this ordinance is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, based on CEQA guidelines 15307, 15308, 15060C2, and 15061B3, to adopt and authorize the chair to sign ordinance 5168, amending title 130 of the county zoning ordinance with the following changes in items 4 through 7. 3, return to the board 1 year following the effective date of the ordinance for an update on the pilot program. 4, delete section 130.43.01B10 license requirements and renumber 1.30.43.10.B.11 to 130.43.101.B.10. 5, amend the residential structure setback imposed by subsection 130.43 105.H.3 by adding the following language. Let me just scroll down there for you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, it's spinning. There we go. Okay. By adding the following language to the beginning of that sentence, if the parcel is located on a planning agricultural, PA, limited agricultural, LA, and agricultural grazing, AG, there shall be no setback imposed by the subsection. If the parcel is located on residential estate, RE, or rural lands, RL, the setback requirement is, Danny?
Just keep scrolling down.
Yeah, Kim, that's not what we're looking at,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah, you scroll down.
In
just a
fact,
little bit
before you
more.
leave that one, though, there's a sentence that seems to be hanging out there.
We'll get to that.
Gonna
in
get
just
to
a
that?
moment.
Okay, all right.
So,
Just scroll down just a little bit more, Kim, to the next
Okay.
page.
Yeah, yeah.
So they can see it in context.
There you go.
That's what we're looking at.
Okay.
All right, got it. All right.
Yeah.
okay, and so the setback requirement is no less than 600 feet. Is that correct, Danny?
That is my understanding of
Okay.
Supervisor Thomas's motion there. So
Okay,
we're saying
and
the
then-
600 feet does not apply except for RE and RL.
Okay. And then number 6 would be amend subsection 130.43.105.H to allow the persons impacted by the setbacks to waive the setback by adding subsection 1.30.43.105.H.6 to read as following. Setback waivers, the setback waivers imposed by this subsection 1.30.43.105.H will not apply with respect to a particular parcel if the license obtains written consent from all owners of the record of any adjacent parcels that are impacted by the setback to waive the setback requirement. The agricultural commissioner shall prescribe the form to be used for this written agreement, and any written agreement must be approved by the agricultural commissioner. A written agreement will expire at the same date that the license expire, that the licensee's license expire, and if the licensee renews their license, the license must obtain a new written agreement. The written agreement is only binding on those parties involved and does not bind any subsequent owner of the parcel. And number 7, to make a conforming change to 1.30.43.105.H1 to be consistent with item 6.
So could you scroll up back to where Supervisor, I had a question. So the reason why that change was made is that the setback waiver.
It's
was
up
already-
further.
Keep
Okay,
going.
keep
scrolling
going
more.
a little bit more. Thank you. So the setback waiver was already present in the boundary line section. But if we're making that apply to everyone, we don't need to restate it there. So we're just, so that, because right now the existing language had it say the setback won't apply if you're one of these two, when
Right.
you're the boundary line you own the adjacent parcel or you get consent. So if the idea of getting consent applies to all setbacks, we don't need to specifically delineate it here. So this is just a conformant change to make this setback waiver apply globally to all setbacks.
But doesn't the word apply still have to be in this? The setback will not, if the
If-
property,
right,
Correct, you're right.
Yeah.
it seems like apply has to be part of, as opposed to taking it
No
out.
strike.
Oh, that was just a, yep, okay,
Yeah.
sorry about
It's a
that.
typo.
Yep.
Yeah, right, yeah, okay.
Agreed.
Yep.
So we're leaving the word apply in.
Yes.
Please,
Yes.
please reject that thing. Yeah.
Call. Catch.
Yeah.
I will amend my motion as such. This has got to be the longest motion ever.
No,
No?
they're,
You gotta
no,
be kidding.
no. I think when they were doing the general plan update, the motions were super long.
Thank you for your work on
And I'll
this.
second the amendment.
Okay, so we got that now, everyone?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment first before we vote. One of the things I didn't like about this is not including the sheriff, but I also don't like the state coming into our county and telling us what we can do and what we can't do. And so this ordinance is based on, the staff put a lot of time into it. Our ag commissioner did a lot of work on this too. So I agree with this. I mean, we can make a look and we can look at it. But like I say, I think this is the best, because if the state comes in, like I said, if we don't get this passed, and if the state comes in, then there's no restrictions. And that'll be a big mess in our county. So
Agreed. Yeah.
anyway, okay.
Well, we could have done a ban, just saying.
Well, I know. We could have.
So, our backs weren't up against the wall. We didn't have to do this.
I know.
So, okay, roll call
know.
vote, please, Kim.
Supervisor Turnbull, how do you vote?
Yes.
Supervisor Thomas, how do you vote?
Yes.
Supervisor Heidel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Novacell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Parlin, how do you vote?
No.
Motion passes 4-1.
Okay,
Good work, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah,
for
there was a
all your
lot.
hard
And thank
work.
you, staff and everybody else that was involved. This has been a long stretch to get here, but I think we finally arrived with a good approach to a pilot program, and we'll see what the data tells us. So looking forward to that.
okay, we're adjourned 4:15. Thank you, everyone.